This artwork is truly special, as I'll be creating it on a wooden panel and trying out a new Rust Effect brand for the first time. Let's explore this unique technique together. Today, I'm working on a wooden panel as my base. I'll start by painting the background with black acrylic paint, which I'll dilute slightly with water to create a smoother texture. Then, I'll let it dry completely. Once it's dry, I'll move on to the next step, applying this rust mixture. It's similar to the one I usually use, but this time it's from the brand Maison de Guay. I can't wait to see the final result. I apply the rust base to the central part of the wooden panel, leaving both the top and bottom edges black. Once the application is complete, I allow it to dry completely. After it's dry, I move on to the next step, applying the rust activator with a brush. While the activator is still wet, I add pigments directly onto it and use the brush again to blend the pigments with the rust activator, creating a unique texture and effect. And I allow to dry 24 hours. Once dry, this is the result. I proceed by adding abstract writing with oil pastels. Then I paint over it using turquoise and white, leaving a few inches of the rust exposed at both the top and bottom. Next step, I spray gold paint and water onto the surface and blend it by pressing and applying a newspaper, creating a stunning textured effect. With a dry brush, I go from top to bottom on the still wet paint to set the gold effects and create a more blended finish. Once dry, I will use sandpaper to remove some of the paint. It will reveal the marks made earlier with the oil pastel in the lower layer. With a roller marker, I will create some marks. That I will partially erase by sanding them. For the next step, I will use a sponge attached to a wooden stick to create shapes with white paint. With a roller sponge, I will apply black paint over the black areas and lightly paint over the rust effects and the turquoise sections. Once dry, I will use sandpaper to refine the surface. Using the sponge stick, I will create abstract writings with white paint, and once it's dry, I will sand it again. Once finished, this type of artwork is sealed with a matte spray varnish. And now you have a beautiful artwork ready to hang. The texture of the wood, the contrast between the black, the rust, the turquoise tones, and the aged white marks create a magical effect for this contemporary canvas. For this project, I'm using a rectangular canvas measuring 50 x 40 centimeters. I'll start by painting the canvas with black acrylic as a base and allow to dry it before next step. I'm going to use white acrylic paint and spray a little water to dilute it. For this stage, I'll be painting with a silicone Catalyht Tool, which will give the piece a more plastic-like finish. The colors that I will add during this process will blend less and create more pronounced marks. I'm going to add turquoise over the still wet white. As you can see, I'm blending the colors using a Catalyht Tool, which allows for less blending than a brush would. This is exactly the effect I'm aiming for. The strokes with the Catalyht Tool are more linear. I'm going to add more white to bring the color down the canvas. Then I continue with gray, which you can mix yourself. In this case, I'm using a pre-mixed light gray. I will then continue with Payne's gray, which has a subtle blue undertone, adding depth and contrast to the composition. I apply the strokes as straight as possible with my Catalyht Tool, then I let the canvas dry completely. Now I'm going to use a technique that creates color while allowing the background to show through transparently. First, I'll sprinkle some turquoise pigments, spray a bit of water, and spread them across the upper part of the canvas. Then I'll do the same with red pigments in the central area. We continue progressing in this easy-to-create abstract landscape. Now I'll add some marks using 2 different shades of oil pastel, stamping them by applying a bit of water and blending with my finger. After that, I pour a bit of white ink followed by some water before spreading it across the entire canvas. Now, I will define the landscape by using a sponge with water to mark the horizon, as well as the top and bottom of the canvas. I'll apply a deep yellow hue, heavily diluted with water, to create soft, translucent layers. Once the paint is applied, I will gently remove most of it using a paper towel. The majority of the paint will lift off, but the deeper areas within the textures of the dry underlying layers will retain an orange hue. We could have achieved this result using different techniques, but I wanted to show you this one, focusing more on the layering process rather than the final canvas itself. Hello and welcome to this exciting contemporary art tutorial, featuring incredible effects using the wet on wet technique. For this piece, I've chosen a 3D canvas measuring 30 by 30 by 3.5 centimeters. I begin by applying a generous layer of gesso to the canvas. Before sprinkling some sand. There's really no need to add too much sand, as I want the texture to be visible but not exaggerated. I will delicately distribute and incorporate the sand into the gesso across the entire front surface of the canvas. As you can see, the sand is evenly distributed across the entire canvas, without any area having more than another. It must be left to dry completely. I now paint the background color that will appear in some spots once the artwork is finished. For this first layer, I use cadmium yellow, which I dilute with water. I let the background color dry again. From this point on, I will overlay paint layers without letting them dry at any moment, allowing the colors to interact with each other. I begin by applying raw sienna with a damp sponge, followed by burnt umber, Using a damp brush, I apply leaf green. I hold my brush at a steep angle so that I can use the full length of the bristles. I apply this green over the entire canvas, leaving more paint in some areas than others. Next, I use the same brush to apply white, following the same method. You can see how the four wet colors blend together, gradually creating new shades. As you know, I always paint the edges of my works as an extension of the artwork itself. Some artists leave them unpainted or paint them black, for example. For me, it's extremely important to do this, especially in this case where the edge is wider than usual. I continue with a damp sponge and apply cadmium yellow along all the edges. Then I continue using the sponge, but now with white, applying very little white paint with this technique. I also work on the edges of my canvas with the same white paint. Once all four edges are finished, I use masking tape to mark a large square in the center of the canvas. I successively applied different colors within the square, using the sponge, starting first with burnt umber, followed by raw sienna. Cadmium yellow. And finally white. I didn't want to have such a defined square. It was just to delineate a space. I remove the masking tape, lightly spray some water, and use the wooden end of my brush to blur the colors. Occasionally, I apply more pressure to scrape off the top layers of paint, making the background layer visible. Then, I will soften and simultaneously remove excess water with a dry sponge. I pour a generous layer of gesso over my canvas, spreading it evenly across the surface. Before sprinkling a bit of sawdust, I add a bit more gesso. Then I go over it with my brush as many times as necessary to ensure it's distributed evenly across the entire canvas. Allow it to dry completely. Next, I'll paint the canvas with a background color, in this case, black, with some water. I'll let it dry completely before proceeding. Now I will use 3 colors: primary blue, turquoise, and white. I'll add a bit of water to each to make them easier to blend together. Using a squeegee, I'll apply them to the canvas, moving it in both directions to mix the colors effectively on the surface. To ensure that the squeegee marks are not visible, I will go over the paint with a damp sponge, gently blending and softening the lines for a smoother finish. Now, using a Catalyht tool, I will apply white paint across the entire canvas, creating dynamic layers and textures that enhance the visual depth of the artwork. Now, using a Catalyht tool, I will apply white paint across the entire canvas, creating dynamic layers and textures that enhance the visual depth of the artwork. The paint is applied differently over the textured areas, highlighting the raised surfaces and adding a distinct dimensional effect to the artwork. Now I will add small paint effects with a palette knife, simply following my intuition. I'll start with cadmium yellow and then add some white, creating spontaneous and vibrant touches across the canvas. This application of white is magical because we now have different shades of white on the canvas. This last layer is pure and contrasts with the nuanced whites blended with other colors from the underlying layers. I continue in a natural way, letting my intuition and my eye guide where I will apply small touches of pink. This spontaneous approach allows for an organic evolution of the artwork, as each addition enhances its overall beauty and depth. My white paint is almost dry. Before it completely sets, I will use a fork to create lines that will be perfectly parallel. This technique adds a unique texture and pattern to the painting, enriching its visual complexity. With the charcoal, I will accentuate the marks made with the fork and add small outlines here and there. This step will enhance the definition and depth of the textures, bringing a more pronounced contrast to the artwork. And to finish, I will use a pencil to create some abstract writing on certain parts, always remaining minimalist and subtle. For this project, I've chosen a 40 by 40 centimeters canvas, which is approximately 16 by 16 inches. I will create a subtle texture using modeling paste with the help of a spatula, aiming to create a slight visual relief. I will apply a very thin layer and allow it to dry completely. I will continue by priming my canvas with a layer of gesso and let it dry once again. Then I will paint my canvas with black as the background color. Why do I start my paintings with a black background? Simply because colors appear differently when applied over a black or white background. Try it out. Once the black base is dry, I continue applying flesh and raw sienna using a Catalyht tool, enhancing the texture and depth of the painting. This technique allows for unique interactions between the colors and the dark background, highlighting the richness and vibrancy of the hues in a striking way. My painting is beginning to dry, but isn't completely set yet. I will add white and continue with the same meditative process. The white will mix very little with the underlying colors since they are almost dry, but we will appreciate the richness of the layers and transparency. Next, I will apply black again over the black base of the canvas and build it up in some areas. On my thoroughly dried canvas, I lightly spray some water before pouring a small amount of Sennelier gold ink. I will apply it again using the Catalyht Tool, creating another layer that will produce a beautiful effect, creating reflections. And once more, I allow it to dry completely. Here is the dry result. What do you think? I look forward to reading your thoughts in the comments. Next, using the dry brush technique, which in reality means the brush bristles are just damp but not wet, I will vertically apply a layer of white to create even more depth. Although this is an abstract painting, sometimes I guide the viewer to see what I intend them to see, which is why the application is done vertically, like rain, perhaps suggesting an abstract landscape. Or maybe not. Then, using a metal spatula, I will scratch here and there into the paint to create effects. To finish this painting, I will create a blue line using primary blue first, applied with a brush, followed by sky blue. And there it is, the canvas is complete, ready to be hung. For this piece, I will be using a 50 centimeters square canvas. First, we'll apply a uniform layer of gesso and let it dry. Next, I'll use raw sienna as the background color, to which I'll add a few drops of water. Once the background color is applied and dry, I will use carmine and vermilion, add a few drops of yellow ink, and lightly mist the surface with water. I'll mix these and spread the paint using a squeegee. I will repeat this process as many times as necessary to achieve a harmonious effect, and then let it dry again. Afterward, I will apply 3 strips of masking tape, spacing them a few millimeters apart from each other. I will paint with black paint using no medium to dilute it. This will ensure that the lines between the masking tape are straight and the paint doesn't bleed under the tape. After painting, I'll remove the masking tape. Then, using the round wooden end of a brush, I will create effects in the still wet paint. Next, I will use white paint and cadmium yellow deep hue and spray a few drops of water on it. In this case, I'll spread the paint using a metal kitchen spatula . Now I will apply black paint with some water to a smaller area, so I'll use a Catalyht tool for greater precision and ease. I will create a new effect layer. I want the lower layer to be visible, so I will use white ink, which I will apply with a brush. I will do the same on the area where I applied the cadmium yellow paint, but now using yellow ink, which I'll also apply with a brush. Then I'll start to dab it with kitchen paper to lightly remove some of the ink. With a pencil, I'll create a kind of abstract script over the areas of my canvas where there are black zones and lines. To create a type of corrosion effect on the upper part of the canvas, I will spray brown ink that I've placed in a sprayer, and also mist some water over it. Then I'll dry and blot everything with kitchen paper. And finally, I will create another type of abstract script in white using an oil pastel. In this tutorial, we'll explore a mixed media technique. I'll start by painting in black my canvas. Once it's dry, I will start by creating a collage using different types of paper, securing them with matte medium. Matte medium is a popular choice in art for its ease of use and its transparent finish once dry. This quality makes it ideal for layering and blending without altering the colors of the paints. It serves both as an adhesive for collaging and as a top coat to unify the appearance of the artwork with a consistent, non-glossy finish. We'll be building a collage with several layers. Feel free to use any type of thick paper you have on hand for this. It's all about layering up and creating depth. Once your collage is complete, make sure to let it dry fully before moving on to the next step. Now I'll gently pull at the edges of the papers to create a decollage effect. This process will reveal new patterns and texture. I'll begin the painting process using only two colors, white and deep yellow A. I'll be applying the paint with a dry brush technique, no medium, just pure paint. This method creates a beautiful textured effect. With this dry brush technique, it's important to alternate the colors as we apply them. I'll lay down one color in a specific direction, then add the next color from the opposite side. This layering enhances texture and depth, creating a dynamic, painterly effect once finished. I allow to dry. I start by pouring a little water over the collage before adding a touch of pink ink. Using a brush, I'll spread the ink across the entire surface. The torn areas from the decollage process will absorb the color beautifully, enhancing the texture. Next, I'll use a roller pen to emphasize certain sections and create abstract marks, helping to unify the composition. Finally, I'll soften some areas by adding water and partially lifting the pigment for a more nuanced effect. And here is the result. Don't forget to varnish your work before hanging it up to protect it and ensure its longevity. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Feel free to ask your questions in the comments. Thank you for your visit and support. See you soon!